Five BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are projected to become the world's leading economies. But what challenges lie ahead for the bloc? Professor Yusaf Akbar from Central European University visits Dukascopy's office in Riga to discuss the potential of BRICS. Thank you very much, Yusuf, for joining us in our Riga office.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Pleasure to have you. Now, the first question I wanted to address, according to the recent report by PricewaterhouseCoopers, BRIC countries are going to become the world's leading economies by 2050. Yeah. However, if we compare the growth rates, it has slowed down if we look at the pace seen in the prior decade. Moreover, we do have other issues. For example, inflation in India has reached 9.3%. Yeah. So this obviously does not allow central banks to cut interest rates to boost the economy. So how do you evaluate these issues? Do you think they're severe enough to, let's say, impair the chances of these countries to become leading economies?
I would argue that it's about long-term growth rates which are driven by the real economy. So, correct, India may currently be suffering from a period of relatively high inflation. As I said, I'm significantly older than you, so 9%. For people today, 9% is large. I remember I was living in countries where you had 20% inflation, 25% inflation. So 9% is high, but it's not necessarily that high. But I think it's about long-term growth rates, and that's to do with productivity. And clearly, China, India, Brazil, their productivity rates are going to continue to outstrip productivity rates of the developed economies. So I think as long as productivity continues to be higher on average over the long term, I don't see why there's going to be a threat to their eventual catching up and perhaps surpassing developed countries.
And if we take specifically China, it is also projected that it's going to replace US as the world's largest economy by 2017. So that's not really far ahead, but at the same time it also has several challenges ahead. 128 people earn less than $1 per day, right. And the economy mainly relies on its exports.
Right.
So do you think perhaps maybe these forecasts are a bit over-optimistic, and what is necessary for China to ensure that its growth rate is sustainable?
Well, first of all, the study that you referred to, it's using a growth model. It makes certain assumptions about growth rates. It assumes sort of uniformity of growth over a certain period of time. But even if we abstract away from the shortcomings of the model used in the study, I agree completely. Look, even if China's absolute GDP exceeds the United States, per capita GDP is, in my lifetime, unlikely to exceed the US GDP. That's the first thing. The second thing, however, what I would say is that, yes, currently the Chinese economy relies heavily upon exports for GDP growth. But one of the things the Chinese government have been very aggressive about in the last 10 years is a refocusing of investment to try and redirect investment away from the coastline, which are the export regions of China, the East Coast, and into the center and west of China, the construction of the high-speed railway system, the unification of municipalities. So Chongqing now is the world's biggest city because they unified 3 municipalities, and that's right in western China in the Sichuan province. So I think the Chinese government are fully aware that if they want to reduce that number of people on $1 a day figure you've quoted, they have to try and shift the economy away from export-led growth towards more indigenous domestic development. And the fact is they have the population on their side, so it's not as if they have a shortage of people to buy Chinese products. So while I'm not going to stick my neck out and say that is for sure by 2017 Chinese GDP will exceed the United States, I am confident that the Chinese government will be able to make that transition towards more domestically driven growth.
Okay, and if we talk about conflicting interests may also arise in a bloc like the BRICS that consists only of 5 countries. For example, Russia and Brazil, they benefit from higher prices for materials, while at the same time it also negatively impacts some of its largest consumers, China and India.
Correct.
So could this actually cause a disharmony in the bloc and somehow maybe prevent its further development?
First of all, I mean, we have to understand the origin of the term BRIC, right? It was put together by Jim O'Neill, chief economist at Goldman Sachs, and even he would admit that it was convenient. It spelled a word. I've always said that when I was talking about BRIC, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about other countries in a moment, but when I was talking about BRIC, I was always very clear about the fact that I look at Brazil, India, and China in a different category from Russia. I mean, if you look at Russia's GDP, it's driven by commodity prices, oil and gas, and we know that the Russian budget, the government budget, goes into deficit when oil prices drop below a certain level. There's a complete lack of diversification of the Russian economy. Now, with the arrival of shale gas in the United States, it's even likely that within 10 years, the US is the world's biggest producer of gas. So even Russia's sort of, principal export may also be threatened. And you've also got the development of shale gas in Europe as well. And if Europe can exploit its own shale gas reserves, it's going to rely less and less upon gas exports from Russia. And I think the whole BRIC thing, I think it's more window dressing than reality. I mean, there's not significant policy coordination taking place. Yes, they have these nice summits when the leaders get together and they have lots of photographs. But the reality is, as you suggest, their economic interests are so diverse, above and beyond the excellent example you gave, that no, I don't really see that being an issue.
Okay, and another block of countries, missed countries, that have been under the spotlight, specifically Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, and Turkey.
Yeah.
They were rather successful in terms of doubling their economies in the past 10 years. So how do you evaluate their potential in terms of becoming economic leaders, and could they be the new BRICS?
Well, I don't think that by definition they can't be the new BRIC because they're just not as big. Perhaps Indonesia, right? But if you look at India and China, it's magnitudes. I mean, it's nowhere close. As far as I'm concerned, South Korea, I think, is a developed economy. I mean, if you look at the economic development of South Korea on a series of variables, one that always stands out to me is internet penetration. Number one in the world. It's not possible for a developing country to have number one internet penetration in the world. So I actually think it's about time we basically stood up and said, look, South Korea is no longer an emerging market. It's a developed country. It has very large multinational firms that are highly globalized, highly integrated. I mean, just take Samsung in the mobile phone sector. I mean, number 2 player in the world. So maybe we can talk about Mexico, Indonesia, and Turkey. It's not as nice. It doesn't say missed. It says MIT. But I see interest in Indonesia. A lot of people I talk to are saying Indonesia is the next kind of frontier for growth, because it's got this huge population, notwithstanding the geography, all of these islands and the archipelago. But I think, yes, definitely Indonesia. And Indonesia is coming out from a period of, fairly unstable political environment to a more stabilized situation.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure too. Thank you.
That was Professor Yusaf Akbar, who discussed future prospects of the 5 BRICS. For more exclusive interviews, stay tuned with Dukascopy TV.